All right, it looks like we've got most of the folks into the system. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar. We're going to start the conversation here with Melvin and Courtney from Meet Minneapolis. I just wanted to welcome everybody. My name is Jenny Rose. I'm the Vice President of Client Services here at Tempest. I'm joined by Melvin Tennant, the CEO of Meet Minneapolis, as well as Courtney Ries. The two of them have we're very thankful that the two of them have joined us today in this conversation so that we can really kind of talk about how their community has been impacted over the past several months and specifically the past several weeks with everything that's been happening in their community. But really, you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about here at Tempest is utilizing the destination organization as a shared community resource and a leader within the community. The Meet Minneapolis team has definitely been living that recently. So just to kind of recap what has been happening in Minneapolis, on May 25th, a man by the name of George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis. Shortly after his death, a video of his killing went viral online. That sparked significant outrage in the Minneapolis community. The day following George Floyd's death, protests began, and that spread throughout the community and to other cities within the country. On May 28th, the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz activated the National Guard in the Minneapolis community. This was echoed by other governors around the country as well. By June 5th, all of the officers that were involved in the incident with George Floyd were charged with his death. Then following that, on June 7th, the Minneapolis City Council announced their intent to replace the police department. Over the past several weeks since Mr. Floyd's killing and throughout the month of June, really, we've seen these demonstrations spread across the United States and across the globe. And this has really sparked one of the largest movements for racial equality that we've seen in about the last 60 years. So I want to bring in Melvin and Courtney into the conversation. Thank you both so much for joining us. Your community has been profoundly impacted by what has happened over the past month or so. And you both have personally been helping leading the crisis response in your community, and are continuing to lead change in your community of Minneapolis. So to kind of start us off, describe from your perspective what happened in the early days of the demonstrations.
Well, hi, Jenny, and hello to all of our folks that are tuned in today. A lot of emotions were expressed by our community, from outrage to sorrow to, oh no, not again, because obviously this wasn't the first Black man to have been killed while in police custody. What we didn't predict is that this really turned into a national, if not international, tipping point. The protests that you outlined were as intense as anything I've ever experienced. I can recall living in California during the time that the Rodney King verdict came down, and so many cities were damaged by protests and all. This was a very intense time that I know our community had not seen for a number of years. We certainly had the history of racial issues in the 60s and 70s as other communities across the country did. But I would simply say this became a tipping point, and I don't know that anyone realized that all of the events would converge in such a way that it would create such an outpouring of emotion, both here and across the country and around the world, with all the protests that we saw.
Absolutely. As an organization, what were the first steps that you took at Meet Minneapolis to really mobilize a response to the crisis that you saw unfolding in your community?
I'll give you just a high level, and then I'll maybe ask Courtney to talk about some of the specifics. But we've always had a philosophy of working very much with a concentric circle. So we start as with staff, then board, then fan out from there. Because if we're expecting our team to be on board with consistent messaging, they have to be fully engaged. So we made sure that we engaged them from the very beginning. And in fact, on the first, we typically do a full staff meeting, stand-up meeting every Monday morning. That next Monday morning, it actually extended for 2 hours because we allowed everyone to speak and ask questions and really get everybody up to speed. So it started there, and again, fanning out to board, to community, to our partners, and also to our clients. So Courtney, maybe you want to fill in some of those blanks there?
Yes, thank you, Melvin, and thank you, Jenny, for letting us speak about this topic that's obviously very important to many different organizations across the country, not just Minneapolis. For us, I think that it was almost like we had just experienced everything that had happened with crisis communications as it relates to COVID and how rapidly that was unrolling and the information was changing so quickly. That was almost the same thing that was happening for us in Minneapolis as well, because there was a moment with the video, then the moments with the response, and then there was the necessity that we needed to respond. And then it became a different level when it became something that was this flashpoint for the country and internationally for people to rally around, or this tipping point. And then the police and the conversations about defunding the police. So really all of these things changed the scenario very quickly over the course of 2 weeks. And we had customers that we were touching throughout the entire process. And that includes both the customers that you think of when you think of the meetings and events, but also all of our businesses, our partner businesses of nearly 700, some of which obviously are located in the situations in places where things were burning. We were also trying to just keep staff informed. We're not in an office, so people are hearing different things from different people and they're not seeing it with their own eyes. And just really also having very honest, hard conversations along the way too, of this is different and this is not just something that you can message your way out of, that this is something that is very deep, very painful, and it's going to be affecting all of the people that are delivering those messages in a way that's intensely personal. One of the things that I've been saying a lot is during that time is that you don't have to like your city very much to still love it. And I think that that is really the emotion that was driving it for people that hadn't really seen these challenges within the city before. So you had a lot of people that were processing things really, really differently. So as an organization, we needed to respect and acknowledge that people are processing things differently, but also get some messaging that is consistent, that provides facts and details and on-the-ground information for all of the people that needed it.
I'll just jump in if I can just add to the staff communications and the staff response. When we did our initial town hall meeting with our entire staff, it really showed that we have a caring, empathetic team that is engaged in the community. And what came out of that, frankly, is after all of the various emotions of people suggesting that I'm afraid for my children, or, you know, whatever, how am I going to go on? I mean, it was just really, really very heartfelt messages that we heard. But at the end of the day, there was consensus that everybody wants to be a part of the solution, which has actually led to a staff-led task force to figure out ways that we can engage not only the staff, but connect with our board, with our partner organizations, and also ultimately, how can we engage with our customers to help them be a part of transforming our city.
Yeah, I want to dive into the staff in particular in a little bit more detail, but I know we've had several people join us a little bit after the conversation started. So I just wanted to let everyone know who's tuning in. First of all, thank you for joining the conversation. We do have Q&A enabled, so you can utilize the Q&A feature to submit questions to Melvin and Courtney. If you have any during the conversation, feel free to utilize that. And also, I just wanted wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this conversation and we're going to share it on our website. We will also follow up with an email once that recording is ready. So if you missed anything in the beginning of the conversation, no worries. You'll have the opportunity to tune in to the recording and catch the earlier part of the conversation. So Melvin, kind of talking about the team in particular, one of the things that I know has been a challenge for a lot of destination organizations, even during the coronavirus response, and that kind of, was keeping the community within the organization itself connected and informed and working together as we all kind of transitioned to a work remote environment and working from home. And then that was really kind of compounded for you during the demonstrations with George Floyd and the unrest in your community. How did you address that with your team, and how did you make sure that your team was supported in getting having the opportunities to contribute, but also feeling like the organization was hearing their voices as well?
We started, Jenny, with the date March 16th, probably a lot of people recall that date, the Monday, the first day of the work from home. That day was originally for us going to be a test day for our team to work from home. And as it turned out, we've been working from home ever since. So we have a wonderful team in our administration department and IT that provided all the technical tools and all the technical support to make sure everybody had what they needed to be able to function from a technology perspective. We actually did what I'm sure a lot of others organizations have done, did a one-time technology stipend. So if they wanted to upgrade to a larger monitor or upgrade their internet, we really wanted to enable people to be as productive as they could from home. And in fact, we've done a staff survey since that time, and I believe 70% of the people feel as though they are as productive at home as they are within the office. So we had a good foundation built, and so we're very, very fortunate about that. But in terms of engagement, we spend a lot of time with our executive leadership team, making sure that we are thinking of ways to engage the team. I mentioned earlier, we have a standing Monday morning meeting with everybody. Each department has their various cadences of meetings, which is important, but it's really important to do a lot of the informal types of conversations with folks, which is something that I miss being in the office because I like to go and check on people personally. But we just very conscious of that. And while we have the formal structure in place, we're also making sure that if there's someone we haven't talked to in a while, that we ask about them. And we continue to look for ways to make sure that people have the technology, but that we also encourage people to talk, to reach out to their coworkers just on an ongoing basis. It's really built into the DNA of how we've been able to operate in this particular circumstance. And Courtney, you have a lot of ways that you and your department really connect. Maybe you can just touch on those as well.
Yes, I saw that we had a question. So Meet Minneapolis is about a staff of 70. We do have about 15% of our workforce is on a furlough currently. So we are a staff of about 60. One of the things that we did do in this situation is we did not mandate it, but we did invite all of those furloughed employees to join us for these more town hall conversations that we were having, because we knew that it was so important for them to have a connectivity. This is a crisis that's changing everybody. And so for the further continuity of our organization and our teams when those furloughs and to have people come back together and to feel that they were part of this shared experience is very important to us. I think as we go through all this, like everything else, the communication styles and where people are approaching things are very different. You know, I had people take PTO to go protest. We had people that took PTO to go clean up. We had people that said, I'm not going anywhere near downtown and I would never invite any of my friends to go downtown. So, you know, you have that, when you're talking about 60 people and an age span of 50 years, you really are talking about a lot of different emotions and backgrounds and trying to make sure that you're talking to all of those people and seeing whatever it is their fears are, because some of the fears are I'm concerned about how this is going to affect my business. And then some of the fears are, I'm scared for my children. And so there's a huge range of emotion. And as leaders and as managers and as team members, you have to be there to help support whatever that leading emotion is, and acknowledge and understand that leading emotion might not necessarily be what your leading emotion is, and to take the lead from the team members. So we certainly had people that didn't want to have conversations, didn't want to be put on the spot. And we had some people that said, this is super uncomfortable and I don't like this. And so that in those points and times too, then I had to come in and say, I know that this makes you uncomfortable, but this is actually this is part of the work that we need to do as moving forward as an organization, and this being part of Minneapolis, is that we need to be more vulnerable and more uncomfortable.
And I'll just add that one of our organizational values is that we want people to be passionate about the work that they do. And so with that passion, that brings up some conflicting emotions at times. If you see a police officer that has done such an egregious act to an innocent man handcuffed, asking for mercy, not getting it. So people are very angry about that, while still trying to figure out how can I still be excited about selling our city. So we had to actually deal with those types of conversations as well.
One of the things that really stood out to us here at Tempest was the very direct statement that you as an organization issued early on in the crisis, and the power of that statement that you put right up on the homepage of your website, really kind of saying that this is not what our community stands for. How did that statement, how did you come about the decision to make a statement like that? How did you decide, what kind of things were you looking at when you were thinking of what to say to the community, and whether to say it in such a public way?
We've always dealt with crises that we've faced, I believe, with authenticity and directness. That's a part of how we operate. We again, while on the one hand, it's our job to put the best foot forward for people considering us as a destination for conventions or for leisure purposes. But at the same time, those very same customers are looking to us for real information. And the consumer is very savvy and looks at a lot of different resources, and it would do us no good to try to sugarcoat things. And we wanted to actually, frankly, from a real practical and business perspective, I won't say control the message, but this is the message, as opposed to having a client or a potential visitor try to sort it out themselves. So it was really to help us start the process of managing the message.
Now, I know that you have recently kind of shifted gears about how you're sharing that message. From a purely tactical perspective, you've actually pulled the message down that was displayed on the homepage. You're utilizing the hero image on your homepage as a call to action to click through to read a deeper statement. What was the calculus that you went through as an organization to decide, okay, the alert, for lack of a better term, that we put on the homepage with kind of the very impactful but rather brief statement, that time has passed, let's shift gears and go this route? And how did you kind of determine that that was the best fit for the time that we're in right now?
I'll let Courtney start off on that.
So when we first had our initial statement, it was the first, which would make sense because it was located in Minneapolis. And I think one of the first questions you ask yourself when you're responding to something is this a crisis within our own circle? Is this a crisis that our customers are seeing? Is this something beyond that? And so Melvin very early on said, we need to make a statement. We need to do something that acknowledges that this happened, because the first thing is just acknowledging it, to say this happened, we know that it happened, we're not going to try and sugarcoat it, there's nothing good to say about this, there's no this happened, but it's just this happened. And so that was very much our early out of the gate. And then when things became a much larger part of Black Lives Matter and a much bigger movement beyond Minneapolis, as well as at that point in time, the looting and some of the violence that you saw with the burning and the takeover of the third precinct, that hadn't happened yet. So the situation did escalate in terms of visibility, the national landscape. I mean, we actually saw increase in our hotel occupancy because of the international and the national media that came into town during that time period. So we definitely knew that we had to, with the benefit of time, as it were, and also the change of the situation, that it was so much bigger than just something that happened in Minneapolis, took that opportunity to extend the statement. Melvin also wrote a much larger, longer piece that went to our partners, which is a big part of this, is that this is not a simple conversation. This is, we'll talk about this. It's not a black square that you put up on Instagram on Tuesday and then you go back to your regular programming. For us, it is much more of an in-depth conversation, and really in transitioning, even from that statement, because we did need to take something shorter and evolve it. Now there's so many layers and there's so many nuances that it really required that more in-depth information. That was something that we continued to build on the fly, but now we've been to a point where we make sure that it's accurate, we know how we're going to maintain it, and we put it up on the homepage, and that's a big part of it.
One of the things that that we've been singing your praises about throughout the coronavirus pandemic is the Meet Minneapolis's team and how they've activated the local community. Your team has done a fantastic job working with your partners to understand how their individual businesses are adapting during shutdowns and how they're still helping support the community. Your team did a great job of completely pivoting the website itself to support the community during the coronavirus, structure your CRM data to be capturing who is operating and how are they serving the community. And so your team had done a lot of legwork putting technical structures in place in advance of the situation with George Floyd. Were those systems that you already had in place, how did those benefit you or make your lives a little bit easier as you were kind of managing the response portion, the communication part of the crisis response?
I can take that one too. So for us, again, because we had already done so many things for the first time as it relates to COVID, there weren't as many barriers and we were able to be more nimble. So the question of, ooh, do I take down the hero shot on the homepage and address this head on, was not as big of a discussion point, because we had already done that for COVID. We'd already done that for coronavirus. Why wouldn't we do that as it relates to this as well? And some of the same challenges that we had as it related to coronavirus with all of the fundraisers and information. What information do you share, especially when so many things are coming out? That also helped us and gave us some guidance in terms of what fundraisers are we going to promote and what's going to be our desire around that. And there are so many small businesses. Do we promote all of those individual GoFundMes, even though we can't vet them, or how do we use our voice to move towards the collective? And with that in mind, our continuing to evolve, but our big area of focus were the two neighborhoods that were the hardest hit, and those large fundraisers that have gotten a lot of publicity. That is where we put a lot of our weight behind, with information about many more.
Mm-hmm. Did you have, even before the coronavirus, did you have systems in place with other community organizations that were kind of loosely in place in the event of a national news event? I mean, I know that you all hosted the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and so you already were the epicenter of a global attention for that reason. So did you have systems in place where you were able to quickly activate a communication network, not only within your team, but then within the greater Minneapolis community as well? And how did those work for you?
I'll give you two examples of that. We have a very close relationship with our city government, which is really important. We actually have, some people might roll their eyes, but we have 6 city council members on our board, as well as the mayor. And although it does create some interesting discussions at times, it has become vitally important to have those relationships built in so we can reach anybody within city government at any time. So we've got that covered. We also have an ongoing alliance with several other business associations in town, a very close alliance with our Minneapolis Regional Chamber, with our Downtown Council, with also the Airports Commission, the stadium authorities, all of the entities that are in the orbit of tourism and meetings and conventions. And in fact, all of those CEOs also sit on our board. So we've got a pretty well built-in structure of those organizations that need to come together with the common messaging or with the common goal. In fact, those are some of the same organizations that are joining forces to work together to transform the city from where we are right now. But Courtney can talk about some of the business associations within the communities that we've built relationships with over the years. That's also an underpinning of being able to activate as quickly as we were able to.
I think that the response to any good crisis, that's where you find out where your friends are, is whose cell phone number do I have and who can I call at 11 o'clock at night and they'll answer. And so I think that a lot of this groundwork, and not even necessarily knowing it was groundwork at the time. So for example, last year we did a pilot program with 3 neighborhood associations to expand Google DMO or Google profiles through the Google DMO program. And it was a pilot program, and we spent a lot of time with those neighborhood associations and those businesses. And it just so happened that 2 of those 3 business associations were the 2 areas that were the hardest hit in some of the protests and also just that agitation, as it were. And so we were able to utilize those resources and know who they were and what they were doing, and be able to amplify those messages, and to be able to already have them know that we were on their side, as it were. We weren't an entity that was just popping up out of the weeds, where right now there is a lot of desire to help. You have so many entities that are showing up to say, I want to do this for you, I want to do this for you, and to try and vet very hard. We just were already there, we were able to do in lockstep. Melvin also had created around COVID a weekly conversation of some of those organizations. So that was a conversation that was very easily able to pull together to say, what are you doing? What are you seeing? Because a lot of it's just information sharing as well. What's going on? What are you hearing? And being able to tap into that collective knowledge really helped inform, make sure that we were getting accurate information out. And then the final thing that I would talk about is that around the Super Bowl, there was a joint information center that came together that was a bunch of different entities that all worked, it was all the public information officers of all of these organizations working together in one room. And they reestablished that with COVID, and then they reestablished a subgroup of that as it related to everything that was happening after the death of George Floyd. And so they actually, the city asked us to join that and to help staff that because of the volume of requests. So that, I think, is more of a testament than anything else, that they felt comfortable enough that even though our arm of marketing and tourism, and sometimes it's written off as this, the lighter side of life, that we could be there in lockstep with them to help shape those messages and tell that honest story about the city and what was happening. And I think that that is something that was very important for us moving forward as we continue to figure out whatever our messages are that we want to tell the larger world.
One of those messages that I know you have been telling and having conversations about is the kind of continuing evolution of the situation, specifically around the decision of your city council to re-examine the policing structures within your community. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of media coverage about defunding or abolishing the police, particularly in Minneapolis, with the city council coming out and saying we're going to completely rebuild what we have here and change course. How has that impacted the communication and the conversations that you're having and the marketing efforts as you tell the Minneapolis story to a really, really wide audience, not only nationally, but globally as well?
It's very complicated because the issue locally has not been settled yet. We have the benefit of conversations with the individual council members and others and really know their true intentions. If I had an opportunity to sit down with every single stakeholder or customer, I would say that very few of the city council members truly intend to abolish the police department. Those are some fairly extreme views. I would say, though, that it is clear that within city government, within the civic community, that there is absolutely, positively unanimity that some significant structural changes need to occur within the Minneapolis Police Department. And as you probably know, the State Human Rights Commission has initiated a probe of the Minneapolis Police Department looking for internal structural racism. Sidebar, our current police chief, who's been chief about 2 years now, actually filed and won a suit for some racial discrimination issues several years ago before he became chief. So clearly within the police department, there are issues that need to be addressed. As far as your question of how this has impacted our messaging, I think Courtney nailed it. It's an evolving situation, and we have to be nimble and be able to pivot because it is evolving. There are obviously some city council meetings occurring, and there's rhetoric being shared, but to the general public, we don't have the benefit of really explaining that there is a process. It is virtually impossible for the Minneapolis Police Department to be abolished. It just can't happen. But when you see a headline like that, a very provocative headline, we have to really use that as the reason why we have to communicate to our audiences. It hasn't been easy. It's been very difficult, particularly on a one-on-one basis when we have salespeople that are getting commentary from their clients when they hear this. How do we explain it? But Courtney's team actually did put together a very nice set of talking points with the facts, and so we're being able to share that on a one-on-one basis. We haven't really sent that out in terms of any sort of mass communication. But everybody on the team is equipped with these talking points, with the facts. And as I said, it's going to be messy for a while because it's going to be debated and it's going to become a part of the November election. So we're just prepared to know that we're going to have to continue to be nimble and flexible in the way in which we respond to those comments.
As you kind of look back on the past several weeks and you're still living this experience and it's still changing and shifting for you, what so far has been the most surprising or impactful part of this crisis for you personally?
Wow, I don't know exactly where to start, but I would say that I have heard from many of my colleagues and customers and other people that I know, friends and family, people that I don't necessarily hear from on a regular basis. There's been a lot of outreach, people actually genuinely concerned about me, about my family, about my community. So the outpouring of expressions of empathy and support have been very, very nice, and I'm very appreciative of them. Obviously, racial tensions exist in a lot of cities, and there have been outbursts of rioting and looting in other cities. And I've had a chance to talk to some of my peers around the country that have dealt with that. And so it's reassuring and comforting that there is a light at the end of the tunnel when something like that happens in your community. But I would say simply for me, it's been the outpouring of concern that I've received from so many people, and I'm most appreciative.
And I know that that concern and that empathy extends throughout the entire Meet Minneapolis organization. And you had mentioned earlier in the conversation that you formed a task force within Meet Minneapolis to kind of examine diversity and help make real change and help keep pushing forward and not waste this moment, essentially. Can you talk a little bit about how that committee came about, what the intentions are with it, and kind of what the team members who are involved with that initiative are looking to accomplish?
Certainly. We have 2 co-chairs and 6 members representing all of the departments of our team. I'll say that I'll be happy after tomorrow. I believe we're going to select an official name for it. They want to have. They've had a lot of great discussions about what to name it that is really real and authentic and impactful. So if we were to do this, have done this tomorrow, I would have been able to tell you what the name of this task force is. But going back to our town hall meeting, Jenny, it was so apparent that people wanted to do something. They wanted to look at us as an organization to make sure that we are walking the talk, so to speak. But more importantly, there was a tremendous understanding that we needed to roll up our sleeves and get even closer to the community than we already are. Because if we don't get involved, we frankly might not have a destination to sell. So we felt as though we needed to provide that sweat equity. And in fact, in addition to what this task force is doing, we have groups of our team members that are volunteering now. I heard from one of our salespeople that 4 or 5 of them went out earlier in the week to do some volunteering at a church that's located in one of the impacted neighborhoods. And there are examples of that across our organization. They're not waiting for this task force. So what that tells me is that there's a willingness and a desire for our team members to really get involved. So we're looking for this task force to come up with activities that staff members can get involved in based on their level of interest. We certainly don't want to make anybody go out to an area that they may see as dangerous, and I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. But there are all sorts of ways to serve and to contribute. So we're going to come up with a menu of options for our staff. We certainly want to have a similar menu of options for our board. That's part of what this task force is going to do. But I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're really excited about is how we can engage our customer audience in transforming our city, since so many groups already want to bring a meeting to a destination where they can have a service project and can leave a legacy or some sort of impact on that community. And we're looking forward to formalizing that in the name of transforming our community into the great place that an even greater place than it already is.
Jenny, there were also 2 things that Melvin was able to do very quickly in response to this, because when people sometimes when they hear task force, they think, oh gosh, process and process driven. And there's certainly part of that, but part of that's also to make sure that we are creating something that's sustainable. But 2 things. First is that within a week, offered an extra day of volunteering for everyone, paid volunteer day for Meet Minneapolis that could immediately be loaded into ADP, our system, so that people could and felt like they had the company endorsement to be able to go and to do these things and to give back to the community in the way that they felt like they were called to do at that moment in time. And then the second thing is that this task force is being led, the 2 co-chairs are managers within their organization. There are 2 directors that are part of this larger task force, but it is not necessarily that's being led by the senior leadership team. And I think that that's also very important. Certainly will be a part of this, but it comes more from within the team. And I think that that was a very smart decision to be able to, again, make sure that we're addressing and letting our staff really come with that, and come with that without the fear, because again, these are very emotional, very raw conversations, and for people to be able to have that without having Melvin or I would say in a room, but I guess looking, with peering faces to say, what are you saying? What are you suggesting? So that they can come with a stronger voice and we can weigh in then, so we know that it's really, we're not squashing down those ideas with our presence. So two very important immediate things that Melvin was able to do that I think have made a really big impact while we continue to work on the task force.
But we do have a very willing and engaged staff, so that made it really easy. So it didn't cause us to have to push or prod anybody. People were raising their hands from the very beginning.
In addition to the opportunities for your team to give back and kind of help aid the community in that way, kind of looking at the crisis response and the communication structures that you have in place, are you looking ahead and adjusting how those structures work? Was there anything that you learned from this process when it came time to activate those structures that you had, the relationships that you had within the community? Is there anything that this has kind of sparked in your mind of, oh, we need to think about this and have this kind of element in place in the event of another crisis down the road, a year or 2 years in advance?
I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Courtney. But you mentioned, Jenny, that we've been blessed to have had some major events here in our city over a short period of time. I kind of look at our golden years starting in 2014 when we had the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. So we began to form those partnerships, those communication channels back then, and then subsequently we've had Final Fours and Super Bowls. So we built off of that foundation, both internally within Meet Minneapolis, but also in concert with some of our community partners. Since Courtney's been on board at Meet Minneapolis, she's expanded the communications department, and I'm sure you had no idea you were going to need all of that support at this particular point in time. So now it makes a lot more sense. Not that I had any resistance to it at all, but it's like, now she's saying, I told you so. But we had a foundation, Jenny, in place, and I believe probably the biggest thing that we do is to try to determine, are there any other partners that need to be at the table? That's a big question we always ask ourselves. If we are in a room, we're trying to answer a question, why isn't this entity or this organization or this person not at the table so we can have direct access? So to me, that's where we are right now, looking at what other partners need to be at the table. The foundation is pretty much in place. Would you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that we've been very fortunate, again, because we've already had these kind of high pressure situations, and most of those people are the same. It hasn't been 5 years since this group was called to work together, and every time the group works together, there's a couple of new faces, but that's okay because there's enough trust that's there. And then we're developing those relationships with those entities at the sheriff's department or the emergency medical or whoever it may be. So I do think that it really, again, having so many people that could speak, I think that with this situation, if there's one thing that I could have had differently, it would have been to have more senior comms, because it's such a very heavy, intense situation that we have a really great communications team. But it was like you needed senior comms across every single organization from the entire city who are all dealing with the crisis at the same time. So lots of very, very, very tired staff, I would say, for many organizations.
And I'll just say that in the most recent crisis, the city actually called Courtney and one of her team members to be a part of that team because they realized they didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So we're being called in to help support those other efforts as well that are not even initiated by us. So that speaks to the fact that we've definitely made an impact with our partners in the public and private sector.
Absolutely. I guess, how are things in Minneapolis today? How is everybody at Meet Minneapolis? How is the community doing?
I'm actually downtown in my office today. And so I like to get down here a couple of days a week, even though we're not going to be opening our office for a bit longer. And we actually did a future of work survey for our team and to kind of see how people are. but it's nice to see activity. Obviously, we had during the height of the protest, a lot of buildings that were downtown that had plywood on it, and all the plywood is down right now downtown. I'm looking across the street. There's a restaurant that some of us go to called the Hen House, which has sidewalk dining. There are people out there dining, and I'm very jealous. I'm inside and they're outside. People are desperately wanting to get back to a sense of normalcy, and we see that. I'll even talk about the epicenter of where George Floyd was killed. It was at the intersection of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis. And I've been down there a couple of times, and it has become a healing place. You've seen lots of murals that have been painted. You've seen memorials that have been created in his honor. You've seen people coming together at that place. So there is a strong desire to heal and try to fix some of the wrongs. But I think people also understand it's going to be a journey, because we know that the uprising and the unrest that we saw after George Floyd was killed by that Minneapolis police officer, that was the tip of the iceberg of issues that had been simmering for a long, long time in Minneapolis and across this country. So what we see, frankly, is that as the most current epicenter of this discussion, we take on this responsibility as a city that can maybe be make the change or show the way for change for the entire country. So we have a lot of resources that have come together. We have public and private foundations, public entities, private foundations that are really coming together to help fund and to really listen to people and understand what the needs are. Lots of efforts, lots of dollars have been raised. The most comprehensive effort right now is a mayorally appointed task force called Minneapolis Forward, and it's a group that is co-chaired by some community leaders, and several of us are on that task force. But it's going to be some hard work for the next few years. But there are these various efforts that are in place. People really want to make things right and get us back to that sense of normalcy.
Absolutely. What is the number one thing that you would advise other destination organizations to do to prepare for a crisis event, but also to respond during the moment of a crisis event? What's the one big thing that you would advise the folks who are joining us today to think about so that they can be prepared and also be able to adapt in the event of a crisis in their community?
First of all, don't hire Courtney. So that's number one. Then we can move on from there. But I'll maybe let you talk about some of the foundational things that you've done, Courtney, to be able to be ready for this.
Well, everyone should have a Super Bowl or other previous crisis that they could rely on.
That's easy, right?
Yes. The most important thing is trust, and the most important thing is clarity. And it's at your own internal stakeholders before you ever get out on your public message. So that means that Melvin and I need to be able to speak very plainly about a word choice or concern or something like that, especially in a situation like this, where every word matters when you're talking about putting something on social media or things like that, and making a decision about what are we going to use and why, and being able to justify it. So I think that that's like the most important thing is in your desire to have a good PR message, don't forget about the value of just speaking very plainly and simply. And then I would say to prepare. And then for the best advice that I could give is to say that if it's truly a crisis, one and done is not going to cut it. So a crisis mode may continue to last for a lot longer than your stamina, or perhaps some people's desires, because that desire to revert to normalcy, as it were, is very, very strong. So making sure that your statement is out there. Just because you said it a week ago, there's still people that are discovering for the first time that day. So make sure that it is reacting to what happened in the last 24 hours or the last 48 hours without coming off as tone deaf or way out of sync. So especially with all of the constant information share that's happening from the news, make sure that your voice is one of those voices.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you, Melvin, for joining us today. This has been a fascinating and very helpful and meaningful conversation. We definitely wish you the best as you kind of continue to address the changing situation in Minneapolis, but we really appreciate you taking the time to connect with us and with everybody here today. Just a reminder for our attendees, we are recording this session. We'll be posting it on our website as soon as it's done processing. So it should be later today. We'll send an email out with a link to the recording. Thank you again, Melvin. Thank you, Courtney, for participating today. We really appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Thanks for having us.